Some people love their cars more than they love their homes, jobs, and spouses. We're not sure that's healthy, but it's easy to see why people get emotionally attached to beautiful or valuable vehicles. It's less easy to see why some people senselessly abandon those vehicles, but it's a known phenomenon, and it happens all over the world. For evidence of that, all you need to do is watch this video. Let's start not with a single vehicle, but a whole collection of them that's been shoved into a 200-foot deep mine shaft in Wales in the United Kingdom. Even the people who live close to the abandoned mine didn't know the car graveyard existed until photos and videos of it were posted online by urban explorers in 2016. The precise location of the mine shaft is being kept secret because authorities believe it to be so dangerous that they want to deter people from visiting. But the pictures are incredible. The mine closed in the 1960s, and based on the models of the vehicles inside it, it's possible that at least some of the cars have been there ever since then. Nobody knows how they got there. It's possible that all of them slid off the road and crashed, but there are so many down in the darkness that there must be another explanation. Without wanting to be morbid, if all these cars crashed, there would be skeletons in their driving seats. It seems more likely that a scrap company has been illegally dumping cars here for decades. If so, that's a matter for the Headloo. That's Welsh for police. Back in 2012, classic car collectors all over the world fixed their eyes on a mystery. One that brought with it an opportunity to pick up a classic car at a knockdown price. In England, a mansion in Staffordshire was repossessed when the occupier fell behind with their rental payments. When the authorities came to claim the property, they found that the owner had fled, and they'd left behind no less than 105 American and British cars, including some highly collectible models like Triumph Stags, Humber Scepters, and Jensen Interceptors. All of the cars were taken into storage, but the evicted tenant faced a bill of more than $100,000 to cover the cost of their recovery or storage. If they didn't pay, the cars would go to auction. Inevitably, they didn't pay. That meant the whole fleet, including a Porsche 911, a 100-year-old Ford Model T, 2 Lancia Fulvias, and an Escort RS 2000, went under the hammer at an auction house. We don't know where all the cars are now, but this has to be one of the most senseless cases of vehicle abandonment of all time. Why not just sell a few of the cars and pay the rent that way? Forests are largely made up of trees. Cars are mostly made of steel. That ought to make the idea of a car forest impossible. But we know a pair of artists in Nevada, USA, who found a way to make such a thing happen. This is the catchily titled International Car Forest of the Last Church in Goldfield, Nevada. But it doesn't look like any church we've been to. To be honest, it doesn't look much like a forest either. It's actually a rough assembly of broken-down graffiti-tagged cars put together by artists Mark Ripple and Chad Sorg, who started off by burying a single car nose first in the sand of the desert and then started to provide it with companions. There are currently 40 vehicles in the forest, some of which are stacked atop one another, and others buried in the same manner as the first one was. The most impressive and improbable of them is a bus, buried at a seemingly impossible diagonal angle, but somehow managing to remain upright. The artists no longer work together after a creative disagreement, but their creation is still standing and will likely stay that way for decades. There was a time when the Bugatti Veyron was the most exclusive car in the world, and easily one of the most expensive. It would still cost an enormous amount of money to acquire one today. That makes the idea of abandoning one unthinkable, and yet here's one that's been abandoned in Moscow. Unfortunately, someone's allowed the iconic car to get into an awful state. The pictures of the car speak for themselves in terms of evidence of the condition it's in. but information about how it got this way is scant. There are rumors that it was hit by an Aston Martin in an accident in 2013. There are photographs of that expensive fender bender, but it can't be proven that the car in the pictures of the accident is the same as the rusty wreck in these more recent images. If it is the same car, the damage caused by the original prang doesn't seem to justify abandoning the Veyron. It shouldn't have been a write-off. Maybe its owner didn't have it insured. All we can do in this case is speculate, because we can't comprehend any reason why you'd ditch a Bugatti Veyron. The classic car junkyard we're about to check out was created on purpose rather than forming by accident, but it's still the last thing you'd expect to find in the middle of a forest in the tiny town of White in Georgia, USA. Old Car City, as it's known, is the property of Walter Dean Lewis, who grew up on the site. It was formerly a general store, which opened in 1931 and sold auto parts. Now, it's home to more than 4,000 rusting classic cars, including the very last car ever owned by Elvis Presley. Some of them are kept looking shiny and new, but others have been left to the mercy of the forest, having stayed exactly where they are for decades and becoming home to animals and plants. In a few cases, tree branches are even lifting some of them up off the ground. Visitors are welcome at the museum site, which charges $15 if you want to take a look, or $25 if you want to take photographs. If you're lucky, Walter Dean Lewis will even show you his skills on the piano while you're browsing. We have another car cemetery to look at, but we have to leave the United States of America to find it. It's Kirko Car Cemetery, which you'll find in Tingsryd, Sweden. To be more specific, you'll find it in a peat bog. It's not the most auspicious of surroundings, but it's home to a long-forgotten collection of European cars like Saabs and Volvos. There's still the occasional American muscle car to be found among all the other rusty old hulks, though. The collection was put together by Åke Danielsson starting in 1935. This was his peat bog, which he farmed by hand. Åke noticed that the surrounding forest was being used as a dumping ground for unwanted cars, so he started taking them in and selling any useful parts left attached to them. The car parts business quickly started making more money than the peat harvesting business, so Åke started buying old wrecked cars on an industrial scale. He passed away in the year 2000, so what's left at the site now are the cars he either never got around to stripping or the shells of the even older cars that have already been stripped. Nick Mead of Brackley, England collects and restores tanks. It's an unusual job, but it can be a very rewarding one. Never has it been more rewarding, though, than in 2016 when he bought an old Russian T-54-69 tank off eBay and arranged to have it delivered. Everything appeared to be normal when Nick collected the tank, but as he started stripping it down and preparing it for restoration, something in the fuel tank stopped him dead in his tracks. There, hiding in the dark, was bar after bar of solid gold. There's no way the eBay seller could have known about this. The tank was bought for $50,000, and the combined value of all these gold bars exceeds $2 million. Nick's first thought was that the gold might have been stolen by Iraqi soldiers during the Gulf War, so he phoned the police. They weren't immediately sure what to do with all the gold, but they eventually took it away for an investigation and left Nick with a receipt guaranteeing him ownership if the inquiry didn't turn up any criminal connections. What happened after that is sadly unknown. Once upon a time, there were dozens of rusting, abandoned cars parked in a forest close to Châtillon in Belgium. There are still a few of them there today, but there's barely anything left of them. Nobody's really sure who put the unwanted car fleet there or why, but there are a few versions of the tale told by local residents. The most popular of them is that all the cars were bought by American soldiers who were stationed in Châtillon during the Second World War. The cars were bought cheaply and would have been expensive to export back to America when the war ended, and the surviving soldiers returned home. Faced with bills they couldn't pay, the troops drove the cars into the woods, parked them up, and then walked away. Perhaps it's more likely that they were abandoned when an old car dealership closed down in the 1960s, but as there's no proof either way, we'll choose to believe the story about the American soldiers. It took more than 60 years for the local authorities to begin dismantling and scrapping the cars, and they still haven't quite finished. Where do abandoned buses go to die in Ireland? Well, apparently, they go to this abandoned bus graveyard in Cork. There are literally hundreds of former public transport vehicles in this old yard, which is hidden away in the west of the city. Some of them are only a few years old, but others date back half a century or more. Most of them were once in service in Ireland, but a handful comes from elsewhere in the British Isles. There are also a few old fire trucks standing side by side with the buses for good measure. Quite why all these buses have been dragged here and left to rot is unknown, but there are whole fleets of identical vehicles rusting away in the wasteland. It would surely make more sense to break them down and reclaim the scrap metal, but perhaps there's a grander purpose in mind for the buses that we're not aware of. Until someone comes and moves them all along or scraps them, they're likely to continue to be controversial among the local people. While some historic vehicle enthusiasts love coming to take a look around, most people think the yard is an eyesore. For the train enthusiasts among you, Istvántalek train yard in Budapest has to be considered a must-see sight, which makes it something of a shame that access is only granted to those who have documented permission from the Hungarian government. To fans of locomotives around the world, the site is better known as the Red Star Graveyard, and it's hiding a few grisly secrets. It's thought that some of the rusting old locomotives stored here were used to transport Jewish prisoners to meet their fate during the Holocaust. The complex was built in the early 1900s as a repair yard, and in the distant southern reaches of the site, there's a repair facility still in operation, but the vast majority of the buildings and engines here are long abandoned and forgotten. The majority of the trains date back to Hungary's Soviet era, hence the Red Star nickname, and were supposed to be repaired before being sent on to the city's railway museum. Sadly, it looks like the work required to make them presentable is never going to be carried out. If you've ever seen the Harrison Ford-led 1993 movie version of The Fugitive, you might recall the scene right at the beginning of the film where Ford's police transport is hit by a train, and both the train and the car go over the edge of a cliff while Ford escapes. The wreckage from that crash can still be found close to the Great Smoky Railroad in Sylva, North Carolina, USA. 1993 was too early for movie producers to use CGI in the same way they would to create such a scene today. So the people making The Fugitive decided the best way to achieve the desired effect was to crash a real car into a real train. The impact tore the car in half and derailed the train. It looks great on the big screen, but the movie crew had no use for the twisted wreckage once they were done filming, so they simply abandoned it where they left it. That was almost 30 years ago, and it still hasn't been cleaned up. The site of the collision is still occasionally visited by fans of the film, but their numbers dwindle as the years pass, and so it's probably high time somebody came and sorted this mess out. Walking through the desert of Qatar can be a hot, dry, difficult experience. So if you stumbled across a collection of over 20,000 cars, vans, motorbikes, and other vehicles covered in white sand, you might suspect that you're seeing a mirage. This is no mirage, though. It's Al-Wukair Scrapyard, and it's where the cars in Qatar go if they're impounded or found abandoned, and their owners can't be contacted. On average, cars stay here for a maximum of 4 months, during which every attempt is made to trace the owners. If there's still no contact after those 4 months, the cars are crushed and then recycled. Exemptions might be given for rare or valuable cars, or cars in especially good condition, which are taken for auction when the 4 months are over. It's plain to see from these images that the majority of the cars at Al Wukair don't match that description. They're battered relics that should have been sent to the scrapyard long ago, and the majority of them are never claimed during their 4-month stay. In fact, based on the images, it looks like the scrapyard's owners are a little behind schedule with their supposed 4-month crushing policy. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and enjoy watching new videos on my channel. Thanks for watching, and see you soon!